At 10, the news now on BBC One with Rita Chakrabarti.
Tonight at 10, new information emerges about the unnamed BBC presenter accused of paying a teenager for sexually explicit images. The young person, now aged 20, is claiming to the BBC via a lawyer that nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place and that the allegations are rubbish. The Sun tonight says it stands by its story, with the parents of the young person telling the paper they spoke out to protect their child. We'll be looking at the legal and privacy issues surrounding this case and also at the many questions remaining for the BBC. Also on the programme. A teacher is stabbed at a school in Gloucestershire. A teenage boy is being questioned on suspicion of attempted murder.
Glad to have her finally out, safe and sound.
It was a bit scary, but it was fine because the teacher was taking care of us.
A royal welcome for President Biden at Windsor Castle on a flying visit to the UK. And Novak Djokovic, chasing an 8th Wimbledon singles title, is through to the quarter-finals.
On BBC London, flowers continue to arrive. The church is staying open. Wimbledon's community pays tribute to 2 8-year-old girls who lost their lives in a crash at their school.
Good evening. More information has emerged concerning allegations that a BBC presenter paid a teenager tens of thousands of pounds for sexually explicit images. The young person, now aged 20, has claimed via a lawyer that nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place and that the claims that first emerged in the Sun newspaper are rubbish and an invasion of their privacy. The Sun tonight says it stands by its story. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police say that they are making further inquiries, but there is currently no investigation underway. The male presenter, who's been suspended, has not been named. In a moment, we'll look at the legal implications surrounding this case and we'll assess the questions remaining for the BBC. But let's first talk to our media editor, Katie Razzle. Katie, just bring us up to date with what's happened.
Rita, in a story where few facts are actually known, tonight we're very much in the territory of one person's word against another's, and a mother and stepfather pitted against their child, a BBC presenter, and the BBC itself. For the first time, we at the BBC have had our own contact with a lawyer acting for the young person involved in this. They've told us one thing, effectively, that the story, as reported by The Sun, is untrue. And now, The Sun's front page tonight, recently published, says quite another. The parents say they stand by their account, and in an interview they say, "We did this to help," and that the presenter has got into their loved one's head, as they put it. The stepdad says the claims tonight on behalf of that young person are not true, and they accuse the BBC of lying about what happened when they made their complaint. So where does that leave us? Not much clearer, perhaps. Here is my account of how the day has unfolded.
The story has dominated the front pages for days, driven by the Sun newspaper, which first reported it in its Saturday editions. Now, a lawyer for the young person at the centre of the allegations has told the BBC that on Friday, via WhatsApp, they told the Sun the statement by their mother was totally wrong and there was no truth in it, adding nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place and the allegations are rubbish. The Sun newspaper has pushed back tonight, telling the BBC its story was about 2 concerned parents who made a complaint about the behaviour of a presenter and the welfare of their child. Their complaint was not acted upon by the BBC. We have seen evidence that supports their concerns, they say, adding it's now for the BBC to properly investigate.
Time is of the essence because it's not fair on victims, it's not fair on people who could be implicated, and it's not fair on the BBC, which does an important job. I'm not here to, as it were, bash the BBC, but I do think they need to get their house in order and they need to proceed promptly. Otherwise, you will have plenty of collateral victims.
According to The Sun, for 3 years, the presenter paid tens of thousands of pounds in exchange for sexually explicit images to a person who was 17 when it began, a potential criminal offence. The family told the paper they were frustrated that the presenter remained on TV after they approached the BBC. So what do we know about the timeline of events? The family complained to the corporation on the 19th of May. Nearly 2 months on last Thursday, the BBC says it received new allegations. The next day, The Sun published claims that a BBC presenter paid a teenager for explicit images. On Sunday, the BBC suspended the presenter.
I think one of the questions that will come out of this in the inevitable inquiry is who did the complaint come into and did they escalate it fast enough? And in future, should a red flag go up when an issue of this seriousness comes in, whether or not there's a huge amount of information or not, that it should go straight to senior management and that they should deal with the issue immediately?
Escalation yesterday involved a referral of the allegations to the police. Today, after a virtual meeting with the Met's Specialist Crime Command, the police said they are working to establish whether there is evidence of a criminal offence. There is, they added, no investigation at this time.
Until it's clearer, until we have a greater knowledge from possibly the police, the BBC itself, the alleged victim or the victim's mother in this case, it's very hard to know exactly what we're criticising the BBC for.
The acting BBC chairman is only in her role after the resignation of the politically appointed former chairman Richard Sharp. Now the corporation is at the centre of another crisis. Tomorrow, she and the Director General Tim Davie will have to face the media as they launch the annual report, with the corporation in the eye of a storm.
Well, in a moment, we'll be speaking to our legal correspondent, Dominic Casciani. But first to Katie. Katie, you've been reporting on this all weekend. What should people bear in mind as they're following this?
Well, I think it's important, Rita, to say when it comes to the legal letter we received here at the BBC this afternoon, we haven't had our own contact with the young person and we don't know their identity despite our efforts. We have not seen any of the Sun's evidence for its stories or the dossier the paper says was handed to the BBC by the family over the weekend. I just think it is a really difficult and complicated situation and one that is fairly challenging to report. The claims in the letter and the counterclaims by the family are another twist in a story that has plunged the BBC into crisis.
And Dominic, we've been talking a lot about privacy issues surrounding this whole story. How does this letter from the young person's lawyer feed into those issues?
I think it's a really, really important development in this story, as is the Sun's latest story tonight. I'm going to take each of these in turn because the law of privacy is there to effectively protect reputations and careers and futures from undue harm, and because there are many things in our private lives which are simply nobody else's business. They are private to us. And if you analyse this letter, what this law firm is saying on behalf of their client, and this is not a modest high street firm, they're a decent sized firm in central London, is they're saying there is a repeated breach of privacy here in this reporting, even though the individual hasn't been named and nor has the presenter. The young person denies involvement in unlawful or inappropriate activity, and they're effectively saying, if you carry on doing this, and if you were to name our client, this is effectively the subtext, you might end up in court. Effectively, that's what the warning comes down to, although there's no warning as such in the letter. And if you take that as a starting point, I think it's really interesting then to have a look at what the Sun has said tonight. There's one line in that which sticks out to me. In the story, it quotes the stepfather saying, I told the BBC I had gone to the police in desperation, but they couldn't do anything as they said it wasn't illegal. Now, we're not quite sure exactly what that relates to, but from the perspective of this young person, and thinking about this just in pure legal terms, if nothing has been done which is wrong, what is the case then for this person to be named or the presenter to be named? And I think this is why there's so much at stake here. Going to the Scotland Yard statement, really telling that they're assessing the information, but it hasn't yet crossed a criminal threshold for them. And I think the takeaway from that is we're not the only ones who at the moment are really unsure about exactly what's been going on.
OK, Dominic, thank you. Dominic Casciani and, of course, Katie Razzle. Thank you both. Well as the questions surrounding the Sun story, there are many questions that have gone as yet unanswered by the BBC. Ros Atkins is here to explain. Ros.
Rita, thank you very much indeed. Well, the BBC says it received a complaint on the 19th of May, over 7 weeks ago. It was then notified of the Sun's allegations last Thursday, 4 days ago. And the BBC has provided very little detail on what it's been doing about all of this, and that raises lots of questions. Before I work through some of them, it's worth saying BBC News' reporting is independent of the BBC as an organisation, We're working to cover this just as other news organisations are. And these are 4 questions about the BBC's role in the story that BBC News is trying to answer. First, how was the original complaint to the BBC made? Well, despite us asking several times, including today, the BBC hasn't said where the complaint was made, how it was made, or who it was made to. Next, what was the nature of the original complaint? Well, the BBC hasn't told us that either. On Sunday, BBC Director General Tim Davie said the Sun's allegations differed to the original complaint in May. Mr Davie didn't say how. Next, what did the BBC do after the original complaint? Well, the BBC's confirmed that after it was made, its investigations unit began an investigation. In a statement on Friday, the BBC said in these circumstances they would actively attempt to speak to those who have contacted them. Beyond that, the BBC hasn't given us any detail of the work that's been done by its own investigations unit. Also this evening, The Sun is reporting that the young person's stepdad put the allegations to the BBC for an hour. And finally, when were BBC management told about all of this? It's understood the first Tim Davie heard about the allegations was last Thursday. The BBC hasn't said who, if anyone, in senior management was told about the investigation over the weeks beforehand. And Tim Davie told staff on Sunday that the BBC is working rapidly to establish the facts. That would concern both the allegations and what the BBC has done about them. But over 7 weeks since the first complaint, 4 days since the Sun's allegations, the BBC is still unable or unwilling to provide more detail of what its own processes and management have been doing since the original complaint arrived. Back to you, Rita.
Ros, thank you. A teenage boy has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a male teacher was stabbed at a secondary school in Gloucestershire. The teacher at the Tewkesbury Academy was taken to hospital but has been discharged this evening. The boy was arrested a few miles from the school at 11 o'clock, around 2 hours after the attack. Our correspondent Phil Mackey reports.
The stabbing happened just after the start of the school day, prompting a massive response. This was just over an hour later, when Gloucestershire Police were still sending reinforcements to secure the site, and while the person they were looking for was still at large. At about the same time, the first message was sent to parents confirming the school was in lockdown. Then, at 11:30, came confirmation that a member of staff had been wounded.
Specialist resources, including the National Police Air Service and plainclothes officers, were deployed to search the wider area, and thanks to their efforts, the suspect was safely arrested by firearms officers. A knife was seized during that arrest.
Anxious parents gathered outside waiting for news, many in phone contact with their children.
The teacher has been absolutely phenomenal. I've been getting some videos from my daughter and I can just see him. He's there supporting the whole class. He sat right by the door as well. He barricaded it. Like, he must have been scared himself. And
eventually, around 1 o'clock, the pupils were let out.
So it's been a really frightening few hours for all of the children who are now just coming out, and especially for the families who've been waiting to see them. They've been in lockdown whilst the police have made sure that the site is safe, but now they can finally get back to their loved ones. Mightily relieved to see each other, I suppose.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Just glad to have her finally out, safe and sound.
Shocked, really. You always think it's never going to happen on your doorstep.
And when you saw the police coming in, how did you feel about that?
It was a bit scary, but it was fine because the teacher was taking care of us.
Pupils say the teacher who was attacked was well liked, and none could understand why anyone would target him. Tonight, some good news. He was released from hospital. And for hundreds of families, there were relieved reunions at the end of a frightening day. Phil Mackey, BBC News, Tewkesbury.
On the eve of a summit in Lithuania, the head of NATO says that Turkey's President Erdogan has agreed to support Sweden's bid to join the Western Defence Alliance after resisting it for many months. Well, our Europe editor Katja Adler is in the Lithuanian capital Vilnius for us. And Katja, how significant is this?
It's really significant, Rita, and important for NATO. Turkey had been blocking Sweden joining NATO because it said the country was too sympathetic, too soft on Kurdish separatists, and also not respectful enough, it said, towards Muslims. There's been a number of incidents of Quran burning. But Sweden said it was working towards allaying some of Turkey's fears, and tonight that change of heart. A huge sigh of relief for NATO. My phone's been alive with messages from high-level NATO diplomats because tonight is the eve of a high-profile annual summit. Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak, Emmanuel Macron of France, Olaf Scholz of Germany, and many more leaders are coming to town. And the focus of their summit, unity, determined unity, continuing support for Ukraine and unity in the face of Russian aggression. So Turkey changing its mind really helps that unity message. And NATO hopes it can show Vladimir Putin that his aggression in Ukraine is counterproductive. He hates NATO's expansion towards the east and northeast. And Sweden and Finland are joining NATO because of his invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, also wants to join NATO as a fully fledged member. That's a lot more complicated, and that will be discussed in detail here over the next 2 days at NATO summit.
OK, Katya, many thanks. Katya Adler there. Well, ahead of that NATO summit, the US President Joe Biden paid a flying visit to the UK before travelling on to Lithuania. This afternoon, he met the King at Windsor Castle to discuss their shared interest in tackling climate change. President Biden also met Rishi Sunak at Number 10, where they held talks over a cup of tea. Our political editor Chris Mason reports.
Descending behind the ancient walls, not many helicopters get a musical accompaniment. But Marine One, as it's known, does, bringing the President to Windsor Castle. This wasn't a state visit, but there was a splash of pageantry, courtesy of the Welsh Guards. British diplomacy, best outfits on, volume notched up. Earlier at Number 10, the red carpet sorted. Now get the cat out of the way. The press pack poised, cameras trained. The President is here. Joe Biden arrives here in Downing Street, his first visit here as President, to be met by the Prime Minister.
You pleased to be here, President Biden?
This visit does coincide with a public difference between London and Washington. America is going to supply Ukraine with cluster bombs, weapons the UK and many others have banned. But today, both men wanted to focus on the bigger picture.
Joe, welcome. It's great to have you here. Back in Downing Street. I think you've been here a few times before, I know, but your first time as President, so we're very privileged and fortunate to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Couldn't be meeting with a closer friend and a greater ally.
The two leaders talked of closer economic ties short of a trade deal, energy security and the regulation of artificial intelligence. The President and the Prime Minister met for around 30 or 40 minutes, meeting on the eve of the NATO summit starting tomorrow in Lithuania, as the Allies debate and discuss when Ukraine should be allowed to join and, crucially, how it wins the war. While in the UK, few American presidents would turn down tea with the British monarch. The King showed Joe Biden around Windsor Castle.
Your Majesty, Mr. President, welcome.
Where they joined a discussion about the environment and climate change. His visit here was brief too. By mid-afternoon, the President set off for Lithuania and the NATO summit aboard Air Force One. The Prime Minister will follow him there tomorrow. Chris Mason, BBC News.
It's been revealed that Russia's President Vladimir Putin held talks with Wagner mercenaries just days after he publicly accused them of treachery for launching a failed mutiny 2 weeks ago. The Kremlin has confirmed that the Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was among those present at 3 hours of talks in the Kremlin, where his mercenaries are said to have declared their loyalty to the president. Well, our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg joins us now from Moscow. So another strange twist to this story, Steve. What's going on?
Yeah, strange twist, bizarre. I mean,
What can you say, Rita? It's very strange indeed. I mean, on the day of the mutiny, Vladimir Putin had called the organisers traitors who'd stabbed Russia in the back, and he promised that they would be punished. 5 days later, goodness me, he was sitting down with them in the Kremlin, with Yevgeny Prigozhin, with the commanders of Wagner, chatting about what had happened. So what does this tell us about the relationship between Wagner and the Kremlin? Well, we knew they were close, very close. Putin had admitted that the state has been financing Wagner. So was this 3-hour meeting in the Kremlin a sort of a post-mutiny, post-mortem, an attempt to reboot or rebuild what had been a pretty effective fighting force for the Kremlin? We don't know. We don't know how that meeting ended. What we do know is that the state media here continues to try to discredit Yevgeny Prigozhin. Last night, state TV said he is not the Robin Hood he tries to pass himself off as. He is a businessman with a criminal past who was involved in dodgy dealings. But for now, Mr. Prigozhin is a free man. So, what will happen next? I wish I knew. My advice, stay tuned for the next bizarre episode in Putin and Prigozhin.
OK, thank you very much. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg there. An inquiry into the deaths of babies in Nottingham is expected to become the biggest maternity investigation in NHS history. Around 1,700 families who received maternity care from the Nottingham University Hospital's NHS Trust are to have their cases reviewed. A previous investigation found dozens of babies died or were left with serious injuries while in its care. The Trust has previously apologised. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan reports.
This damage was all so preventable. Why was there this massive cover-up?
Sarah and Jack Hawkins lost their daughter Harriet before birth in 2016 due to failures in maternity care. Her avoidable death turned them into reluctant campaigners who've become all too aware that they're not alone.
So we hear that people don't really believe it's true, that there is a maternity scandal. Today, surely they can no longer hide from the fact that the maternity department here have harmed so many people.
We're talking people that have left the hospital without their organs, empty car seats. You know, we carried a tiny white coffin. It's absolutely horrific.
I'm Sarah Hawkins. My daughter Harriet died in 2016. Her death was completely preventable.
The couple were among some families who attended a meeting today where the Trust promised to both improve its care and its attitude, removing what it called a brick wall that had developed whenever families raised questions.
I think we made a start today of making it absolutely clear that we recognise our failings, that we want to regain the trust of the public, that we want to come and meet them on their terms as we have done today, listen to them, because in listening we hope that we can make any changes stick.
The vast majority of cases in the review date from 2012 and include deaths and injuries to both mothers and babies. The chair of the inquiry, which started last year, says some improvements have become obvious.
One of the key themes that is already coming out, and I've shared that with the Trust, is this blindness almost to the fact that mothers are in labour and they do need help and they need to come in to hospital.
The problems in Nottingham will add to the issues already revealed in Morecambe Bay, in East Kent, in Shrewsbury and Talford. The bottom line is that according to inspectors, around 4 in 10 maternity units across England are rated as either requires improvement or inadequate. The review, whenever it's published, will finally publicly recognise years of hidden hurt. Michael Buchanan, BBC News, Nottingham.
The witness has told a jury at Southwark Crown Court how the Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey allegedly drugged him and sexually assaulted him as he slept. The Oscar winner is on trial, accused of historical offences against 4 men. Mr. Spacey denies all 12 charges. EasyJet has cancelled around 1,700 flights in July, August and September, travelling to and from Gatwick Airport. The company said 95% of affected passengers have been rebooked onto alternative flights. The airline says the threat of industrial action and the war in Ukraine have created challenging conditions in air traffic control. A new scanning technique has been developed that can see inside the body in unprecedented detail using a transparent mouse. A chemical process used on the mouse after it has died means it is entirely see-through and has enabled the scanner to detect cancerous tumours much earlier than usual, just at the moment they're forming. The scientists say it could be revolutionary for medical research. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh has the story.
Meet the transparent mouse. Everything inside, its nerves, tissues and organs, all made invisible. It's done by removing all the fat and pigment from its body after it's killed using a chemical process. And then it's bathed in different chemicals to reveal the parts the German developers want to study. Under the microscope, they're searching for cancer tumours, shown in small pink and white dots throughout the body. Compare this image to a conventional scan, which shows only 2 of the largest concentration of tumours.
It enables to see every single cancer at single cell level, because diseases like cancer, they kill at cell level. So if we don't see them, we cannot treat them. This technology enables us to see this hidden enemy.
In green are the nerve endings outside the mouse's body. Different chemicals show different tissue. Inside, the purple tube snaking around is part of its digestive system. We can even look in the tube. Medical researchers try out new drugs and treatments on mice first before trying them out on people.
The new scanning technique enables scientists to see things they've never seen before. It also has the potential to improve the way in which new drugs are developed and tested. And it could greatly accelerate the understanding of hundreds, if not thousands, of diseases.
Currently, scientists slice up tissues into very thin sections to study them under a microscope. UK researchers are excited about this new way of analysing their samples.
The potential that it has to be able to identify various tissues, cells, structures, and also understanding really the development of diseases. We can't wait to get our hands on the technique.
Muslifa Hanifa is imaging cells to help create an online map or atlas of every cell in the human body. She says the new scanning technique will be useful for all kinds of medical research.
Without a doubt, it will accelerate the pace of medical research. I mean, combining these types of fantastic cutting-edge technologies and building the Human Cell Atlas will no doubt completely revolutionize medicine.
A whole human won't be made transparent because the process would kill the patient. But it could soon be used to study donated tissues and organs to study human diseases, something scientists say will transform our understanding of how our bodies work. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Wimbledon now, and the defending men's champion Novak Djokovic is safely through to the quarter-finals after he beat Hubert Hurkacz in 4 sets. The reigning women's champion Elena Rybakina is also through, but there was frustration for the Russian 16-year-old Mira Andreeva, whose remarkable run came to a controversial end. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss reports.
It's become one of sport's most familiar celebrations. It's now a decade since Novak Djokovic lost a match on centre court, although he did lose a set to Poland's Hubert Hurkacz. But it was soon back to business as usual. Djokovic safely into the quarter-finals and still the man to beat. Although Carlos Alcaraz might have other ideas, why hit over the net when you can just hit round it? A stroke of genius from the world number 1 as he beat Matteo Berrettini. Other more unheralded stars have emerged though. Chris Eubanks, 6'7", with an even bigger personality. Over 5 scintillating sets, he blazed past Stefanos Tsitsipas. In the women's singles, last year's finalists Elena Rybakina and Ons Jabeur are both safely through. In fact, they will now meet in the quarter-finals. But there was disappointment for one of the game's most exciting talents. 16-year-old Mira Andreeva won the first set against Madison Keys, but then it all went wrong. After being twice warned for throwing her racket, she was docked a point.
Point penalty, Mira Andreeva.
I didn't throw the racket, I fell.
That gave match point to Keys, which she promptly took. Andreeva refused to shake the umpire's hand afterwards, but she will surely be back. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Wimbledon.
Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Chris Fawkes. Chris.
Rita, our weather's kind of in a stuck pattern at the moment, and that means we've got lots of more unsettled weather coming our way with loads of showers in the forecast. Now, today we've seen some pretty heavy downpours. This was one of those passing across the skies of Loch Carron in Highland. Now, some of the heaviest downpours actually worked across the southwest of Scotland. In Threave this evening, we've had 15 millimetres of rain in the space of just an hour. And that really heavy rain is now working across central and eastern Scotland. It will continue to push that way over the course of the night. At the same time, another band of rain in the south. That's going to be bringing some heavy downpours across parts of the Midlands, running into Lincolnshire, East Anglia. Across the southeast, it's quite a warm and fairly humid night. Temperatures 17 or 18 degrees, but otherwise a relatively fresh feel to things 13 or 14 degrees quite widely. Now, tomorrow we start off with that band of rain across East Anglia, southeast England. They'll tend to clear out of the way. Then it's a day of sunshine and showers. Now, I think some of the showers are going to be quite lengthy across Wales and the Midlands with some thunderstorms and probably some fairly lengthy downpours as well for West Scotland, perhaps the central lowlands. Temperatures a little bit below average for the time of year, but where the sunshine comes out, it shouldn't feel too bad. For Wimbledon, most of the day is going to be dry, but I couldn't rule out an odd passing shower. Now, if we look at the big jet stream pattern across the North Atlantic, at the moment we've got this kind of shape in the jet stream, and this is what we call an Omega block. These blocked weather patterns don't move very much at all, and for the UK, we find ourselves underneath this trough portion of this Omega block. And what that means is we get low pressure after low pressure forming. So even midweek, as we say goodbye to one area of low pressure, another one pings up almost out of nowhere and moves back across the UK. It's that kind of repeating pattern that we're going to see over the next few days, and is exactly why the weather is so unsettled. Lots of showers in the forecast. Some of them will be heavy and thundery through the rest of this week, into the weekend, even into the first part of next week as well. But even with these showery conditions, there will be some fairly long spells of sunshine. You just might have to keep the umbrella handy. Rita.
Chris, thank you. And that is tonight's BBC News at 10. There's more analysis of the day's main stories on Newsnight. That's with Victoria's Derbyshire, just starting on BBC Two. But the news continues here on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. From the 10 o'clock team, it's good night.